to DSW's endpoint assessment for the Level 3 Housing and Property Management Standard. My name's Isobel, I'm a product owner at DSW and I'll be talking you through this standard today. This recording is designed to give you an overview of what will happen during endpoint assessment, what to expect, when it will take place, but also how apprentices can prepare and what support is available. By the end of this, you should have a clear understanding of how the process will work and what the requirements are. And of course, if there are any questions or anything you need more information on, we'll show you where to go for additional support at the end of the recording. Today we'll be discussing what the endpoint assessment process looks like, how and when it will be delivered, what happens during the assessment itself, and we'll go into more detail about the Housing and Property Management Standard, how each assessment method works, and how it will be graded. What is endpoint assessment? This is what we call the series of assessments an apprentice must take to prove they're able to do the job for which they've been training. These take place once the on-programme period is complete and the apprentice is deemed ready for endpoint assessment. Assessment design and delivery. DSW create assessment materials in line with robust design principles that are recognised by Ofqual. These principles are validity, reliability and comparability, manageability and minimising bias. This means you can be assured that our assessments are appropriate for the standard, that everyone will get the same experience, that the assessments will be consistent and fair, and that everyone will have a chance to succeed. When does endpoint assessment happen? Apprentices must be on programme for a minimum of 12 months before they come through Gateway and enter the endpoint assessment phase of the apprenticeship. The apprentice, employer and training provider must agree that the apprentice is demonstrating competence against the knowledge, skills and behaviours of the standard. Once the apprentice is Gateway ready, the training provider must submit the required forms to DSW's EPA Pro portal for approval. Further information on Gateway knowledge requirements can be found in the toolkit. Any forms requiring a signature must be completed using either a wet or digital signature, otherwise they will be rejected. Once the apprentice's Gateway documents have been approved, the independent endpoint assessor will make contact within 2 working days to arrange a planning meeting with the person listed as the on-programme assessor on the apprentice's EPA Pro profile. The key dates associated with the endpoint assessment will be planned during the planning meeting and confirmed via email with the training provider. What happens during endpoint assessment? During the endpoint assessment phase, the apprentice must complete the required assessments with support from their employer and training provider. All assessment criteria must be met for the apprentice to be deemed competent and achieve their endpoint assessment overall. This should typically take 3 months to complete. On successful completion of all endpoint assessment activities, DSW will request the apprentice's certificate from the Education and Skills Funding Agency. This will be sent to the employer's address marked for the attention of the apprentice. It can take up to 8 weeks for certificates to arrive. The Housing and Property Management Endpoint Assessment consists of 2 assessment methods which must be completed in the following order: a project and a presentation and interview. There are 59 assessment criteria that the apprentice must meet across the 2 assessment methods. The mapping and amplification document in the toolkit lists the assessment criteria and gives some guidance as to how the apprentice may demonstrate competence against each one. We'll look at each method in a bit more detail now. Project. The first assessment method, the Housing and Property Management Endpoint Assessment, is the apprentice's project. The apprentice is expected to lead on a significant work-based project which delivers genuine value to their employer and/or clients. The project should also be broad enough to enable the apprentice to demonstrate a significant number of the 59 assessment criteria that make up the Housing and Property Management Standard. The project must have direct relevance to the housing and property management occupation. The apprentice might, for example, lead on a project which is aimed at implementing a specific policy or piece of legislation to ensure that their organisation remains compliant. To successfully complete the work-based project, the apprentices must submit the following documents: project report with supporting evidence, project diary and project referencing table. All 3 documents must be submitted after the apprentice has gone through Gateway and it's been confirmed by DSW that they have entered their endpoint assessment period. The date the project is assessed will be agreed with the assessor during the planning meeting. The apprentice may start their work-based project up to 6 months before they get to Gateway. However, they must not begin to write up their project report until after their Gateway documentation has been approved by DSW. There are a total of 59 assessment criteria in the Housing and Property Management apprenticeship. Apprentices should aim to meet all 59 of the assessment criteria within this assessment method. However, apprentices do not need to meet a minimum number of assessment criteria through the project. Project diary. After completing their project, the apprentice is required to produce a project report. This is a written narrative which provides an overview of the project and the activities the apprentice undertook to lead the project and deliver on its objectives. It's important that the evidence is attributable directly to the apprentice. It's therefore recommended that apprentices avoid using the term we when discussing their own contributions towards the project. The apprentice should focus on the assessment criteria when writing and presenting their project. The assessment criteria and guidance around meeting and exceeding them is detailed in the toolkit. The maximum word count for the project report is 7,500 words. There is no minimum word count. If a report submitted for the assessment exceeds this word count, anything over 7,500 words will not be assessed. It's of vital importance that the apprentice does not commence their project report until after their gateway documents have been formally approved by DSW. Starting the report ahead of gateway will invalidate the assessment and result in a non-progression grade being issued. Evidence types. The project must be supported by additional evidence to authenticate the apprentice's account and should be mapped to the assessment criteria using the referencing table available in the toolkit. One piece of evidence could span several assessment criteria. Conversely, there may be assessment criteria which require several pieces of evidence in order to meet them in full. The focus should be on quality over quantity, ensuring the evidence meets the criteria in full. A piece of evidence might be a single document, or it may be a folder containing a number of documents which link together. The project evidence should be a combination of anecdotal, performance and product evidence. More information on evidence types can be found in the toolkit. We'll go now on to types of evidence. Types of evidence. As you can see, there's a wide range of evidence types, and this list is not exhaustive. You may find that the evidence you choose to provide is different to what appears here, which is absolutely fine as long as it's demonstrating the assessment criteria. Heavily redacted documents are preferred to excerpts, but both would be accepted. We do ask that videos and recordings are a maximum of 2 hours within the project, and they need to be timestamped in the referencing table. The project report, project diary and project referencing table should be submitted to DSW prior to the agreed assessment date. Within 5 working days of the agreed assessment date, the assessor will upload an assessment record to EPA Pro containing feedback for the project. This will include summative feedback and how many assessment criteria have been met for each competency area. This will be subject to quality assurance checks by DSW. As apprentices do not need to meet a minimum number of assessment criteria through the project, all projects will be graded on EPA Pro as completed. The project assessment method is not allocated a grade, as the evidence demonstrated is combined with evidence from the presentation and interview to give the overall grade for endpoint assessment. Presentation and interview. The final stage of the endpoint assessment comes in the form of a presentation and interview delivered via video conferencing software. The apprentice is required to deliver a 15-minute presentation giving an overview of their project, activities undertaken, and the outcome. This is a good opportunity to bring in assessment criteria that were perhaps difficult to include in the project report, but can be highlighted within the presentation to add further context, background, and rationale. If the apprentice has a preferred platform, please let the assessor know during the planning meeting. It's also recommended that the apprentice test the software and ensures they can share their screen prior to the live assessment, and both their camera and microphone are working. The apprentice may use whichever medium they choose to deliver the presentation, provided it's suitable for the format of the assessment. For example, the apprentice should ensure that any visuals can be clearly seen by the assessor. The presentation should last for 15 minutes. The apprentice may wish to practice their presentation to ensure it lasts for typically 15 minutes. This will allow sufficient time for the interview portion of the assessment. The presentation is assessed, and any assessment criteria not met through the project or the presentation will be addressed during the interview. Interview. The presentation is immediately followed by an interview which will last up to 75 minutes. The interview will focus on any assessment criteria not yet met within the project or presentation, including any exceeded criteria that may contribute towards achieving a distinction. To ensure consistency, DSW holds a bank of core questions which must be used. However, the assessor may contextualise these to align them to the apprentice's project or presentation. The apprentice will deliver their presentation to the assessor via a video conferencing platform such as Zoom, WebEx or Teams. Whilst presenting, the apprentice should ensure the assessor is able to view their materials. Apprentices do not need to submit their presentation materials. The apprentice may request a time check during their presentation. The assessor will endeavour to do this at a suitable time, such as in between slides or sections. During the interview, the assessor may ask one core question for each assessment criteria to be covered through the interview. For each core question asked, the assessor may ask a maximum of 2 follow-up questions. Follow-up questions will typically be used where the assessor does not yet feel a criterion has been fully met or where they're exploring further to see if it's been exceeded. Within 5 working days of the presentation and interview taking place, the assessor will upload an assessment record to EPA Pro containing feedback for the presentation and interview. This will include summative feedback and how many assessment criteria have been met for each competency area through the project, presentation and interview. This will be subject to quality assurance checks by DSW. The presentation and interview assessment method will be graded on EPA Pro as completed. This assessment method is not allocated a grade, as the evidence demonstrated is combined with the evidence from the project to give an overall grade for endpoint assessment. Grading. The apprentice will receive their overall grade within 5 working days of the presentation and interview taking place. In addition to the 59 individual assessment criteria, the standard is also made up of 26 competencies, for example, communication. Each competency contains between 1 and 5 assessment criteria. The final grade is calculated by adding up the number of assessment criteria that have been met, not met, or exceeded within each competency area. There are 3 grades available: fail, pass, and distinction. To achieve a pass, the apprentice must fully meet all 59 individual assessment criteria across both assessment methods. To achieve a distinction, the apprentice must fully meet all 59 assessment criteria and achieve an overall exceeded in each of the 26 competency areas. Resits and retakes. A resit does not require further learning, whereas a retake does. Apprentices who receive a fail result following the presentation and interview will have the choice whether they resit the project, presentation and interview, or just the interview. If the apprentice chooses to resit the project, presentation and interview, they have the choice whether they complete a new project and presentation or rework their previous submission. If the apprentice chooses to resit the interview only, they will be required to demonstrate all assessment criteria that were covered within the previous interview, including any which were met. The apprentice's employer and training provider should assist the apprentice to create a supportive action plan to help them prepare for a resit or retake. Resits and retakes are not offered to apprentices wishing to move from pass to distinction. Watching, we hope this has been helpful. As always, we're happy to help if you have any questions or need any more information, so please do get in touch. You can email us at info@dswlearning.co.uk or give us a call on 01302 760 008. Thank you.